And welcome once again to another edition of Good Books. I'm your host this week, Dr. John Cook, and with me today is Jennifer Holland. That name may sound familiar to you. She's the author of the New York Times bestseller Unlikely Friendships, which was on the bestseller list for almost a year. And she has a new book out called Unlikely Loves in a similar vein. Jennifer also writes for National Geographic and lives in Silver Spring, Maryland, with her dogs and her lizards and her other critters that she loves. Jennifer, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much. I appreciate the chance to be on.
I want to ask a few questions about what you wrote in the preface and the intro, and then give our listeners a flavor of some of these great stories. There's 43 stories, so we obviously won't get to them all, but they really are a delight. But in the preface, you said something about stories of caring behavior between animals seems to fulfill a need for joy and hope amid this struggle and strife in our world.
Yes. I think the timing is good for books with happy messages, just because it seems like we're all kind of buried in a lot of grim news these days, and that seems to be the case all around the world. So anything that can bring a smile to people is something that I like to do. Mm-hmm.
You raise an interesting question for us animal lovers about love. You know, the argument goes back and forth about whether animals actually feel love. But, you know, you talk about how you feel, the energy you feel inside as you watch your dogs running around happily, and what you get from cuddling up with a warm cat. And but when there's no human, is there love? And that's a serious question. I mean, we all anthropomorphize our pets, I think.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think I use the word love playfully in this book. It's, you know, it's certainly not a scientific term. We don't really even know what it means in the human world some of the time, I think. But the point is just that there are affectionate relationships in nature. There does seem to be more and more evidence that other mammals are capable of a lot of the same emotions that we have. And you see that in these stories. They're all true stories, and there is clearly something else going on in some of these. It's not just about instinct to be a parent or something, but there seems to be a need for companionship that looks an awful lot like something we're familiar with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, intraspecies care is what this is about, and I noticed that a lot of the critters that got together had traumatic beginnings or got separated from their families somehow. Do you think that's an important part of bonding with a different species?
I think it is. It does seem to be a pattern, and I think a lot of times the animals that lose a baby or lose a parent, they do seek to have that kind of relationship with, you know, probably whatever animal they come across. So I don't know that it would necessarily have to be the one that they pair up with in the book, but I do think there are needs that go, you know, sort of beyond what we once believed in other animals, and that having a trauma in the beginning and needing, you know, some kind of companionship is part of a lot of these stories.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's take a look at a few of them in, because this is great. I'm fascinated by how many times dogs are involved, because it's funny, I was having a talk with some friends about how I think dogs understand unconditional love better than humans do.
Absolutely.
But there's a story about this Great Dane bonding with a fawn. It's actually the first story in the book.
Yeah.
And it's a really strange kind of relationship, but it turns out that they just behave like two best friends who are actually very affectionate toward each other.
Exactly, and what's so interesting about that story, which actually some people may know now, it's been part of one of the TV shows about these relationships, but that deer is blind, and so the Great Dane really kind of took on the role of the seeing eye dog for this other animal. So it's even beyond sort of just the palling around together, but it's actually a relationship that helps the deer to survive.
Mm-hmm. What struck you about the location of some of these? I mean, this one's from Canada. You had a lot of them in England in particular, it seems.
Yeah, it is an interesting phenomenon. I think the Brits seem to really cover these kinds of stories a lot. You'll see them on some of the online newspaper sites, and they're usually sort of tongue-in-cheek. They're very funny, and I'm not sure what that is about. There's also, I think, a lot of farm settings and things like that, and you do tend to see domesticated animals kind of coming together in those settings, and so maybe that's part of it as well. But yeah, it's common in Britain apparently.
The Arabian horse that made friends with the dog, and this was in Florida. This was in this country. Was a mare that was found in poor shape, and this family took her in and cleaned her up and fixed up her hooves and fed her well.
Yes.
But this beautiful white dog, and oh, by the way, I should add that the pictures really make this book. There's some wonderful photos in Unlikely Loves that people will enjoy very much. This beautiful dog was sort of a misfit on the at home, but apparently this shepherd husky got connected with this horse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of a particularly beautiful story because the horse, toward the end of its life, really kind of just needed to be left alone and quiet, and the dog seemed to really understand that and would sort of protect the horse and kind of, stay in contact, but not bother it, would share the food and just kind of be present, almost like someone who was, around a family member who was passing on, and there's just something really special. That dog is, its name is Wolf, actually. It kind of has a wolfy look about it, and the owner has taken that dog to many facilities to meet with children and elderly, and it just has that kind of warmth in its personality.
Mm-hmm. Now, I began thinking about unlikely pairings, and it starts with the duckling and the terrier.
Yeah.
The duck gets lost, and some dogs might say, "Oh, that would be good to eat."
Absolutely.
But that's not how this one turned out.
No, they really become friends and playmates. It's, I'm sure, very funny to see a duck chasing a ball and trying to pick it up and playing fetch and that kind of thing. But they nestle in together in the bed and kind of groom each other in a sense. And it's just, again, just a really affectionate relationship between two animals that you would never think would get together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and seeing the picture of the dog with the ball in its mouth and the duck ready to chase it just really struck me. It's like, is this a dog or a mallard?
I think the duck's not quite sure either.
Let's see. How about the donkey and the sheep? Again, we're back to England.
Yeah, that's a great story because it's really, there's a heroic aspect to that because the one animal was attacked by a dog and the other really came to its rescue. I mean, literally just came screaming in and, went on to the dog and bit its neck and tried to tear it off of her friend. And it's just, again, to put herself at risk and to really obviously care enough about this other animal to do something like that just kind of makes you think, a sheep and a donkey, who would think? But they're actually very intelligent and clearly very capable of bonding as friends.
Mm-hmm. And that one was really touching because the sheep had been hurt so badly by the attack that it was kind of paralyzed and couldn't chew its cud very easily.
Right.
But the donkey kind of helped out with that. Yeah.
It's just so neat to see them cross species lines and to offer up assistance like that. It's just a kind of a beautiful sentiment.
Now, the crossing species lines reminds me of a very interesting one where we bred some Z-donks in one place.
Yeah, I love having, it has to be at least one that, actually has a result from all of that love. And in this case, the zebra and the donkey kind of got together on the sly, and this took place in Georgia, actually, and actually made some babies. And they're just precious. They have, little striped legs. Looks like they've got, Pippi Longstocking socks riding up their legs, and kind of a donkey face. And this happened more than once at this place, and has happened actually at some other zoos and facilities around the country. I've heard about some other breedings of that sort. So there can be an actual crossbreeding now and then.
Mm-hmm. And what does it take for that? I know that there. I've seen ligers in zoos before too, lion and tiger mix. How much commonality is there in the DNA for that to work out? Do you have any idea?
I think it has to be pretty close. I think there are a lot of natural barriers in place between most species to keep that sort of thing from happening. So they need to be, the females have to come in heat at the right time. There has to be, all the parts need to match up. Everything has to kind of work like a nice, neat puzzle. So, but there are, I think there are a number of animals that can crossbreed in that way. So the whole species definition gets a little muddled.
Mm-hmm. We'll turn back now to Poland because I really enjoyed the story of the blind boxer and the goose, the African goose.
Yes, that's good.
they bonded really well, but they did bicker occasionally too.
Absolutely, like brothers or brother and sister. And what's also neat about that story is I had seen a photograph from it, and it was probably logistically the most difficult story to track down. The woman lives in a tiny village in Poland. She speaks no English, and with a friend of mine who is Polish, we managed to track her down by snail mail, of all things, and get her to do an interview with us, and my friend translated it. So it was really neat to actually pull that story together, because at the beginning it looked like it wasn't likely to happen, the unlikely story. So, but yeah, just very fun to see a goose, befriending anything. It's kind of funny because they're kind of can be sort of snotty and nasty.
Right.
But it, again, sort of took on a seeing eye goose role in the life of this blind dog.
And letting him know when the food is there and stuff like that was interesting. But it was kind of funny that sometimes they'll steal a little bit of the dog's food and they play rough together. But this is another one of those things about love that triggered me to underline and ask about. When they sleep, the goose stretches out his neck across Bach's body, cuddling. Bach is the dog, cuddling the best way a goose knows how. And once, when the dog was sick, the goose acted lethargic and down. And the owner said, "I don't think it's usual for a goose to show emotion, but he seemed to show it then." Yeah,
absolutely. It is really unexpected with that animal.
Now, there are a couple that involve the human species in animals. I enjoyed the story about the little boy in, I guess it was Austria, in a tall mountain area with those giant ground squirrels. What are they called? Marmots?
Marmots, yes. Yes, that was a lot of fun, too. His mom likes to take pictures. She takes beautiful photographs, obviously, and so she started bringing him to this park where these marmots tend to congregate. And these are wild animals, although I'm sure a lot of people do throw them carrots and other snacks. But he really, the boy especially, just really loved being around them and wanted to spend their whole vacation there, just in this one area where the animals were. And they would come running to him when he showed up and crawl all over him. And it's not something that you necessarily want to try at home, but
Right.
It was kind of an unusual circumstance, I think.
But you wrote an intro to that about how you once sat still in the yard and made a clicking sound till a squirrel came over to check you out.
Yeah. Very exciting. My first wild animal encounter as a child. Not very exotic, but there is a certain thrill about having an animal approach you in a pleasant way, not in an aggressive way, and just kind of feel that somehow you connect with that animal on some level.
And another one of the human connection stories that was enjoyable was this story in an Alaskan wildlife refuge where a girl seemed to bond with a moose, and the moose connection was very strong.
Yes, and a moose is, a very potentially aggressive animal. This is not something you want to walk up to in the wild by any means. But this one had come in injured, and she ended up being the caretaker initially. And so the moose really saw her as the mama moose, I guess, taking care of it. And she goes back to visit, and the moose always recognizes her. And that again is one of those kind of life-changing experiences, I think, for a person to get to have that kind of relationship with a wild animal.
Cats and dogs. There's a mama mutt and these kittens that it cared for like a mother.
Yeah.
Really
what's amazing about that story, I think, cats and dogs, people see them kind of bonding and getting together in a lot of households. But in that case, the kittens were brought in and needed to feed, and this mutt actually began lactating to feed these kittens, even though she wasn't really in a position to need to do that. She didn't have her own litter that needed to eat at that point. So that is just, amazing, the body sort of responding physiologically to the circumstances. It's just really fascinating to me.
I've had dogs and cats together, and what I find is if one of them is a baby, when it comes into the home, it's a lot easier for them to get along than if they're both adults.
Yeah, I think that's very true. They kind of grow up together, or at least the older one will kind of tolerate the little one a little bit better, just knowing that it's young and weak and inexperienced.
Let's not miss the hen and the pups, though. This one was a surprise that the hen would kind of adopt and take care of and keep the puppies warm.
I love it. The pictures are so fun with that, too. But the hen, she would literally stand by the dog bed and wait for the mother dog to go outside and to relieve herself or whatever, and the hen would sort of sneak sneak in and get up on top of the puppies and keep them warm, and would even sort of fluff out her feathers to make sure that everybody was kept underneath the feathers. And I think it's just, again, a bird like that, you don't really think so much about it having those kinds of needs, or whether it's affection or not. It's hard to say, but there was certainly something that drew her to those puppies.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of these stories involve big dogs like pit bulls and Rottweilers and Great Danes. And I think so often we think of pit bulls as aggressive because sometimes they're trained to fight, but they seem to be really nurturing animals and some of the sweetest animals in the stories that you provided. Yeah,
I love that about, the more I research this sort of reputation-busting stories where the dogs that get such a bad reputation can kind of be cleared a little bit, and you see that it's probably the people and not the animals that are the problem in cases of violent dogs. These dogs are not necessarily innately violent.
Mm-hmm. One of those examples is a pit bull that kind of adopted a goat when mama delivered the baby and apparently didn't want it.
Yeah.
And the pit bull kind of took over nurturing the little billy goat.
Yeah, and seemed to do a better job than the mama goat was ever going to do. So you never know.
and that's something common is that the nurturing one with the baby often starts grooming it, and that seems to be one of the ways they begin to connect, is they give it licks or whatever that is.
Yeah. I think grooming is such a major part of the connection in a lot of mammals, and I think in primates and dogs and many others, they kind of get to know each other's smell that way, and I think it's also just a soothing, kind of calming experience for both animals.
Mm-hmm. I don't think there's much science to support me, but I think sometimes the sight of something attracts an animal, like the spotted lamb and the Dalmatian.
Right.
That we talked about.
Again, the photos really tell the story, but here's a lamb that really looks like a Dalmatian. I mean, it came out spotted. It was kind of a lucky thing that happened, and one of the Dalmatians in the household did take it on as her own, and the owner doesn't think that the colors actually had anything to do with it, but who knows? Again, the Dalmatian might have thought, that one looks familiar. I better get in there.
The other appearance story that comes to mind is about the swan who felt attached to a boat shaped like a swan.
Yes, that was on a lake in Germany, and that really became, you can imagine the community kind of getting into that one. But yeah, this black swan kind of bonded with a boat, and the people really wanted to make sure that these animals stayed together, because the swan seemed very displeased when the boat was taken away for cleaning and that kind of thing. So the community rallied around it, and they were able to keep the pair together for the whole year, which is just kind of fun.
And I think I remember that the swan wasn't well received by other swans when they tried.
Right. Yes, exactly. There was some jealousy there.
Some of us just need a plastic mate, I guess. I don't know. Unlikely pairings, the dolphin and the stray cat. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, cat goes right out there. It didn't actually leap into the water, which I have heard some stories of dogs doing. In the first book, Unlikely Friendships, there was a case of that. But this cat would go out on the pier each day and kind of have this communication of some sort with these dolphins, and literally reaches out to pat them on the head or the nose, and the dolphins seem just as curious. So I think two curious animals getting together can often lead to some kind of bond like that.
Mm-hmm. Several tales about dolphins. I mean, you mentioned the fact that dolphins will help each other out and protect each other, but they also protect other mammals from time to time. Mm-hmm. And then there was one case where you had the story of a dolphin who was swimming with some sperm whales because he had some kind of spinal defect. Yes,
and this I love because it was a completely wild situation. This was not a captive dolphin or anything. Some scientists were out there doing some marine mammal work and came upon this combination and noticed that the dolphin seemed to have some kind of spinal deformity or something. And so they thought, maybe the dolphin was left behind or rejected by its own pod, or maybe it couldn't keep up, something like that. But dolphins are certainly one of those animals that needs to have a social network. It's very, very important for their lives. And this one found it in a pod of sperm whales, and the whales were very accepting of this other species, and it stayed right with those whales, and even kind of acting more like a whale than a dolphin, would sort of, do some of the behaviors that the whales did. And, just the level of the ocean where the whales were hanging out is not typical for the dolphin, but it just seemed to find a family in this other species.
Mm-hmm. The one that starts out with the most intense story that I think you started off with, they're not for the faint of heart, but the macaque that was attacked and lost both legs and an arm.
Yes.
And somehow got to a facility where they could nurture it back to health in an isolated pen.
Yeah.
And then introduced a bunny and a guinea pig?
And a guinea pig,
right.
Yeah. Yep. This is a macaque in Thailand, and yes, it was unfortunately had been attacked by dogs. There are a few of those stories that have a kind of an unhappy beginning, but I tried to find happy endings. So hopefully people can handle that part. But it really began to thrive only when they brought in some friends for it, and it was clearly very, very affectionate and very connected to especially the rabbit, but then also a guinea pig as well.
Yeah, I like the name of the guinea pig, Curly Whirly Brian.
Curly Whirly Brian.
Some of the names are hilarious. In fact, I'm going to skip over to a name now because it comes to mind. Edgar Allan Pig.
Yeah.
Later, the name was shortened to Edgar. I think that was probably wise for the literature fanciers, but that was an interesting one, and it prompted the owner to work harder to rescue other animals.
Yeah, it really changed her life to have the pig. He was just such an inspiring animal, and became so bonded with the other animals that she had, and I think it really just changed her whole point of view, and she ended up really dedicating her life to this, what's called Edward's Mission, the place where she now takes in hundreds of animals at a time and cares for them. Mm-hmm. So it's, she's really feels that he started this whole journey for her, and it's just a really amazing animal.
And I've heard that pigs can be easy to get along with, make good pets, but this one had his favorites, and he there were certain animals that he was okay with. There's a great picture of a goat on top of him and a lamb underneath him.
Yeah, it's true. He didn't necessarily unconditionally love all animals, but but in a way that makes it even more interesting too, because then you think, well, why would he was making choices about who he wanted to be around, and that's kind of neat too.
And there are a couple of stories like that where there's like the catalyst for a lot of love going on. I love the elephant and the zoo friends in Indonesia. Mm-hmm. Again, a tragic story. The palm oil industry in Indonesia levels the rainforest from time to time, and so a lot of animals lose their home. And this poor elephant had a shotgun wound in one eye. Yeah.
This poor thing actually survived a whole lot of difficulty, I think, before it was brought to Oregon. It was very fortunate that they had a place for it and the people willing to care for it. But yeah, they elephants, like dolphins, very, very, very social animals, need to have a group to rely on for many things. And so not only did this elephant bond with the other elephants, but the zookeepers would walk her around the zoo, and it was like she was going around visiting all her friends. And even sea lions and others would come over, and they seemed to like have a chat of some sort. Mm-hmm. Who can say what they were saying to each other? But it's just, again, shows you another side of wild animals and a nurturing and compassionate side.
There's a really good picture of this elephant reaching out its trunk to the glass tank for the sea lions, because apparently that was one of the significant friendships right away she took to the sea lions for some reason, and they to her.
Yep. And I think what's interesting, I always like to say, although this book shows a lot of sweet, compassionate, happy stories, that clearly the wild is not a place that's always like that. It's a very difficult place for animals to live. They're struggling to survive. They probably don't have the luxury really to kind of pick and choose who they're going to bond with. There's a great quote by Teddy Roosevelt about the utter mercilessness of nature's existence, and about how death is by violence, cold, and starvation in nature, and it's a rough place. And so to kind of pull these stories out and find this other side, is just a really fun and interesting kind of journey for me.
My experience in reading the 43 stories is that they're awfully short, but so are the lives of some of these animals.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of time for them to grow and evolve in some cases, especially animals that are bred for food like turkeys and pigs. They don't live very long. And,
right.
And so the story is short, and even after they pass, people still think back on the bonding they had with whatever. And the one about the Asian elephant that we're just talking about was really educational for me. I didn't know how social elephants were, and especially the matriarchal leaders in family groups, and that they mourn their dead in certain ways and so on.
Right.
But in that same story, we were reminded of the palm oil industry. And I love, you have lots of inserts where you explain the breeds of animals and interesting points, like the one about the dogs and cats, that 1/3 of all households have a dog or a cat in America. But the Indonesian producers of palm oil, which is used in biofuels and food and all kinds of things, wipe out massive tracts of the rainforest and encourage consumers who to seek palm oil-free products.
Yes. It's important to me to get, when I can, a conservation point across and something like that. I think it's really important that people understand what, their choices mean, and what sort of, when you trace back the products that we use, you want to see what's really happening in order for us to have all those things that we like to have, and to make choices knowing that is I think important.
We've only got a couple of minutes left, but I did want to mention that a rat and a kitten can get along.
Absolutely. Rats are as almost as smart as pigs, I think, and or maybe more so. And pigs are quite smart, but rats are even ticklish. There was a recent study out about them, so we have to give rats a lot more credit than we do.
And I think it's a matter of how we frame things. I mean, there are plenty of rodents that people choose as pets, and there are squirrels, and there are rabbits, and there are guinea pigs, and rats are just another one of that family.
That's right. And they aren't all the ones that are scooting around in the drains in New York. There's all kinds of rats, and they're not necessarily dirty, biting, filthy animals.
But you do wisely advise us not to adopt a rat from the city streets.
Yeah, probably best to leave those alone.
And I only got a minute left, but I did want to mention I guess it was in Brazil where this guy had pet snakes, and let's see, he would walk with a python wrapped around himself, and one of his animals bonded with, was it a dog?
The dog, yeah. He found that, again, I think this snake is well fed, so I think
that's
in
important.
other circumstances this might not be a good idea. But for whatever reason, the dog seemed to like having the snake on it, and the snake probably found some warmth in the dog. I wouldn't claim that the snake is having an emotional attachment to the dog per se, but it's fun to think about it.
Yeah. We've been talking with Jennifer Holland. The book is Unlikely Loves. It's a delightful read. It's by the Workman Publishing House. I'm your host, Dr. John Cook. I want to remind you that if you don't get to hear our program the 4 times a week that we air on 88 FM, you can also catch us on our Facebook page, Good Books Radio. But 88 FM is back to streaming live on the Internet, so people all over the country can hear this interview if they so choose. Good Books Radio, Thursdays at 12:30 and 7:30, and Sundays at 6:30 and 3 p.m. I'm your host, Dr. John Cook. Thanks for listening.